I'm Dr. Sally Carriott, and I teach at Florida State University.
Mhm.
And more interesting than that is the idea that I am the longest teaching faculty at Florida State University. I first came to campus in 1969, 1970.
Mhm.
And here we are, some 54 years later, and it's been an exquisitely wonderful treat.
Mhm.
And I feel like I was able to grow up on the campus because I was a kid when I started. And my work specifically is with grief and loss and trauma. Those are the classes I teach. I teach pre-med and med students, healthcare students. I have a private practice where I talk with folks who have had great losses. One of the things that I say in class, and that both of the women who are here today, who are part of my life from the time that they were much littler and have made me so very proud, not because I had anything to do with it, but because
Oh, you can
this
take
is,
responsibility for that.
You know
here they
you're a
are,
part of that.
is that there is a lot to learn. And the only thing, if you take anything from this podcast, probably the most important thing, if I were to give you three things, is the only thing you can do wrong with someone else who's had a great grief is to do nothing. You don't get to ignore it. You don't get to not bring it up. Well, I don't know what to say, or I don't want her to stop thinking about it. You can't bring the person back, but you can validate they're gone. That the two emotions associated with grief are mad and sad, and mad often looks very different than sad.
Mhm.
And it's hard to interpret that someone who's acting up, especially a child,
Mhm.
is really, if I take his anger hat off, I'll see that it's about grief.
Yes.
Mhm.
All of the great traumas we're seeing in the world today, children and young adults acting with so much anger,
Mhm.
can usually be traced back to what happened in their little lives growing up.
Mhm.
And that part of life is grief and loss. If you love, you're going to grieve. That's
Mhm.
just the rule.
Mhm.
And that anyone that thinks it goes away doesn't understand the face of grief. It becomes more manageable.
Mhm.
But the other thing is, everybody does it differently.
Mhm.
So we don't get to make decisions based on, I don't know why she's acting that way. She didn't even know him that well.
Mhm.
Well, it might not even be about that grief. It may be that this one was one too many because there's a million other things going on in her little life.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, snap, I'm just had it. And it's a complex and profound emotion, grief,
Mhm.
because we just have no idea how we're going to feel.
I like that you bring that up because you say it looks different for everyone. And until you're walking through it, I don't think you can anticipate, well, I'll be sad for 30 days, I'll be
Mhm.
mad for 10, and then, I'll be sad again, and then just,
That'll
okay,
be okay.
then I'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, and the
Mhm.
worst part, of course, is the world wants you better in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
if you've had a great loss
Mhm.
and it's a month later and someone on Monday says, "Oh, how was your weekend?" And you say,
Mhm.
"It wasn't so good." Really? What was wrong? Well, I lost my child 2 months ago and we always had weekends to spend together. Are you
Mhm.
still thinking about that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Every minute of every day is how I'm
Mhm.
thinking about that. Because
Mhm.
grief is like a rubber ball encased in a glass cage. And on
Mhm.
one side is a pain button.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, the ball fills the whole cage and hits that pain button every day. A
Mhm.
song, the back of someone's head, a car, a bag of Cheetos. All of those are what we call anchor responses.
Mhm.
And you respond. But
Mhm.
as time goes on, the ball gets a little less big and a little less big and only hits that pain button like on anniversaries or big events or
Mhm.
other kinds of things. But it doesn't ever escape the glass box.
Mhm.
It's always there.
Mhm.
And without really healthy interventions with grief,
Mhm.
it is likely to be a good sized ball for a lot of time until we get to the point that we try to ignore it. We especially if you live in a family where people say, get over it. If someone punishes you because you come home and someone has made fun of you because your brother has died, and instead of putting you on your lap and rock-a-bying you and saying, I'm so sorry, sweetheart, you say, well, next time you see that guy, you just give him a hit. That's not, we don't act like the person that's wounded us. And yet we're often taught to do exactly that. And so the idiosyncratic nature of grief is so profound because it always looks different.
So what are some of those healthy ways you just mentioned that we can walk through grief?
Well, one is I start with how good the support system is. Do you have anyone in your life that will always rescue you, that will always listen? It's interesting, listening to someone is so wonderful, it almost feels like love. And it's pretty close. You know, I talk to the students, I'd probably talk to you guys about platitudes, where if you've lost someone and someone says one of these things, I bet you guys can imagine. What shouldn't you say to someone who has had a great grief? What you shouldn't say, a platitude. What, honey?
Sometimes you hear it's going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
They're in a better place.
Yeah, what's better than with me?
Yeah.
Heaven might be my home, but no one here was homesick. That it's going to be okay is really a tough one, because let's say I'm going in for a breast biopsy, and one of my friends says, well, I know it's going to be okay. My instinct is to say, do you have inside information? Because I've looked at all my lab work and I'm thinking that you don't have any clue about whether this is going to be okay. And it is not helping me. I do teach people to actually call folks on that. Or I know just how you feel. Well, the only thing I know for sure is that you have no clue how I feel. Well, you know, everything happens for a reason. Really? What's the reason?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that I work a long time with the kids with that. I try to get them to the point where they can see the distinction between everything happens for a reason and there's a reason everything happens. My only brother, who I adored and was the only son of an only child, after being brilliant and teaching at a university, develops a brain tumor. And it's horrific. And he dies. And I say to the students, if everything happens for a reason, what's the reason my brother died? And there's often religious overtones. Well, you'll find out someday. Well, that's not helping me. And if you want me to be a better person by having my child die, that's not a good thing. But there is a reason. He died because he had a brain tumor. And that's the difference between an ethereal statement that, you know, everything happens for a reason. That doesn't comfort anybody.
Right.
And generally when someone comes up and asks you after you've had a loss, how are you doing? Almost everybody says, I'm okay. And then the person that said it feels like they've asked.
Yeah. And so
but the person that's sad,
yeah.
Okay, now I can go now. The person who's sad knows that that person doesn't really care. And so then the second question I ask is, how you really doing? And then they go, oh, like you really want to know. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of our mistakes we make are doing that kind of thing. So what I tell folks is, for example, if you want to, the care and feeding of a grieving person means that you don't take them a Publix platter and everybody, no Publix platters, okay? Those just get thrown away. No more Publix platters. You can take them an ice chest full of ice with water and pop in it. You can take them paper products because they ain't going to the store. So they're using napkins for toilet paper now. You can take them, but stop with the other stuff. Ask them what they want. Start a lunch tree or a dinner tree with the folks that are around. do the shopping, mow the lawn, pick up their kid from school.
Wow.
If you lose a child and you're in a grocery store, I can't tell you the number of people I see weeping in front of the frosted flakes.
Mm.
And I'll say, those frosted flakes can be sad. And then they inevitably say, so I lost a child and that was his favorite cereal. There are traps everywhere. I
Right.
call that sniper grief. You can get ready for birthdays, anniversaries. He would have graduated from high school today, or this is our wedding anniversary, but you can't get ready for the frosted flakes, for the cologne that someone wears that walks by you, and it brings you to your knees. And that's sniper grief. Comes unexpected and you have no way. All of a sudden you're fine. A song comes on the radio, you got to pull the car over because you're hysterical. And folks don't get that. The whole concept of when people say, I don't bring it up because, I don't want her to think about it. Yeah, well, she's already thinking about it. And you're you're going to be okay is always fraught with issues, because actually, here's what I've found in being in private practice for 50 years. People actually end up being okay. If they're mentally healthy to begin with, if they've got a great support system, if they are allowed to grieve as they want, they might want all kinds of pictures around, or they maybe don't want pictures around, or they want to talk about it and the friends listen, because again, it's like love. Then 99, probably not that many, but 95% of people, when it's what we call a normal grief. A normal grief is people get cancer. Folks get in car accidents. People drowned. Those are normal grief issues. And we know that that happens, that people die, and often in those situations. But if my child is jumping off the Twin Towers, that's a whole different thing. That's trauma. And the way we handle trauma is not think about it. And so if we haven't had any trauma intervention and no help, then 10 years later, you'll tell the story like it happened 10 minutes ago. And so, but in normal grief, you just be a good friend. You check in on the anniversary of the death, you send flowers or a note. Churches are often not really good about this, interestingly enough. I have tried, one of the things that I've suggested for churches is to keep, now we can put it on a computer. You guys are kids, but I was born when none of this was going on, which makes me very thankful that there is no record of my behavior up until the time that I was an old lady, because nothing good would have come of that. So in a church, keep a record of members that have died right next to them when their wedding anniversary would have been. When was their birthday? And if your church has a visiting group, those are the places to go on those days. And if they're little old people, you might want to say, do you want me to take you to the cemetery? Would you like to do that? Or what? Tell me your favorite memory. Tell me your favorite story about him. That's how we take care of people who are grieving. Sometimes you just want to go and sit. Last night, I was going to say it was 2 nights ago, but last night, one of my former patients who lost her husband during COVID wrote me a note, and she said, I'm really okay, but I'm just feeling puny tonight. And I know she plays cribbage. And I said, how about this? Let's you and I play cribbage for a few games. And we just played for probably half an hour. And she said, you know what? I think I can sleep. I said, great. So we're not doing miracles here. We're just being present. And you guys talk about self-care. And I think there's a big issue associated with people not giving themselves time to grieve. Well, I was, and they kind of say it like it's an honor. I was back at work the next week. Why were you? What state were you in? What kind of work were you doing? And then they will often say, but I don't, I hate it when people come up and tell me they're sorry, because then I start crying. Well, yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Is you've lost this important, profound thing that's been with you forever. You've got a whole year ahead of anniversaries.
Right.
You've never had April 6th, April 7th, April 8th without them. And so, and your body gives you a little bit of Novocaine-like substance in the beginning. I hear people saying a lot, you know, it's bad, but not as bad as I thought. And then in my mind, I think you just wait.
Yes, wait until it wears off.
Yep, when all the tuna casseroles are gone, the people have gone back to work, you're in the house alone, and no one comes home at 5 o'clock from work. So then the next year is going to be worse. And by now people are over it.
Yeah.
And so you're out there by yourself, and it's every night that no one's coming home at 5 o'clock.
Right.
And all of your friends that invited you as a couple aren't doing that, not to be unkind, or they're mad at you because they asked you to something and you said yes. And then when it came time to actually go, you couldn't even bear the thought of getting dressed. So you cancel, and they take it personally. So you want to be a good friend? Then you recognize that all invites and all acceptances are all maybes.
Gotcha.
Or if they snap at you because they're a little angry that day. And again, I just can't talk to her. Ever since Gerald has died, she's just been so mad. Yes, because he died. And so taking care of yourself with this, sometimes you have to tell your friends how to be a good friend. It seems crazy that you're the one that has to do the teaching. A lot of cases where a bunch of people are pregnant at the same time. How old's that little one of yours, Val?
She's 6.
Okay, so Dylan's only going to be 3, right?
Yeah, he'll be 3 this year.
He'll be
later on.
3 in the
Yes.
28th of December.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are often friends that get pregnant at the same time. And then it is not unusual if one of those people loses the baby. And then the other people don't go and visit because they don't want to feel bad because they have a baby. So they isolate that person rather than, I mean, I think their heart is in the right place, but the actions just do not play that out. And first thing about care is getting over the idea that you need to leave them alone. But by the same token, you need sometimes to leave them alone. And they need to say, not today. It's been that kind of day. So if I were to ask you guys, what, and Shamika, I know you've had a great grief. What helps you the most if after a loss? If people do what?
If people know that the quality of anything that I'm going to do is not going to be the typical quality if I wasn't grieving.
That's the first great thing.
Yes.
One of two things happen. Either you throw yourself in your work and become a crazy person, or you say you're a school teacher and you're thinking to yourself, I couldn't care less when the Battle of Hastings was. My father was dead. And then someone wants to tell you about their broken nail, and you then slap them and say, see, you're talking about breaking a nail. And so, quality, self-quality, and you often are more punitive with self. This whole thing about self-care kind of goes right out the window. And this thing about, certainly other people have people who die and don't feel as bad as I do. Oh, yes, they do. They feel as bad. They feel worse. You're going to feel worse. The only thing I say to my own patients is, if you do the work, I promise you'll feel better. But not for a long time, probably. Because then they wonder why they're not better. And then they become self-punishing. Or they start having semantic behaviors. They start acting like the person that died or what they died from, or you know, have you ever seen the movie Rabbit Hole? Shamika, you would have seen it in class, but it's a story of a couple. It's Nicole Kidman and I can't remember who plays the husband. And the child, their only child, chases a dog into the street and is hit and killed by a car.
Okay.
It's a magnificent piece about couples who have the same loss and behave so exquisitely differently.
Different. Wow.
Right.
And it's really a wonder presentation. I use Karina. I don't know if you know that movie. Whoopi Goldberg plays a woman who has aspirations to be a songwriter or write liner notes in the back of albums. And she's gone to college and she's graduated, and of course it's the 50s. She can't find work, and she's just working as a cleaning woman or as a nanny. And she comes to a house where a little girl has lost her mama suddenly. And the way that she manages that little girl's grief is better than 20 lectures I could give.
Wow.
And so I suggest that people watch it. It's called Karina. And I'm not a huge Whoopi Goldberg fan, but it's the most exquisite piece I've ever seen her do.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago in London, I'm in London every summer, and at least one weekend I teach when I'm there. I go to one of the poshest hotels in all of London just for the weekend. And I'm at the poshest hotel in London, and I'm having a cup of tea, of course, and Whoopi Goldberg walks in. Because that's where fancy people stay in London. And I'm thinking to myself, and the Brits never go up to people like Americans do.
Yeah.
They sign my paper. Oh, you're so wonderful. Brits just.
Oh, that's nice. That's lovely.
This is lovely. I'm so glad to see you. But they don't even say that. I mean, those folks use the subway, so it's not atypical to be on the subway with a star going to do a show on the West End. And so I kind of want to tell her the importance of that movie. So she sits down to have a cup of tea, and she's right next to me. And so I'm thinking, so I say, Miss Goldberg, is it okay if I tell you something? And I tell her about the importance of that film and about helping how to understand children's grief, and that whoever wrote that script did a magnificent job with what the little girl does. And she could not have been more gracious. And she said, no one has ever, I mean, people talk to me all the time, she said, but no one has ever mentioned that. And I said, I can't begin to tell you how exquisite what you did was, and you modeled the behavior. It wasn't a lecture somebody gave. You modeled the behavior. And interestingly enough, because the kids are watching it now, and it's 2022, 23, 24. I mean, I've been watching it, been showing it for many, many years. But now it's 2024. And so the daddy of the little girl and the husband is grieving too. And so everybody's grieving differently. The kids, Whoopi's grieving that she's just a housekeeper and wants to be, and we see her getting rejection letters through stuff. And there's very little written about sex and grief. It's interesting. There's almost nothing in the.
And that could be a whole nother episode in and of itself. Things that people do when it comes to sex when they are grieving. That is a whole.
And then they wake up one day and go, "Oh, why she did that?" Or because someone reached out and said, let me. And so often if there's two couples that were really close together, it's often the other person that died that tries to comfort, and then they end up in the bed, and then they realize what they've done. And I talk to students a lot about don't tell. Nothing will come from telling. This was grief. You get a pass for that.
You are grieving. It's okay.
That's all right. It's like when I flirted with people during COVID. I thought I was going to die. So all bets are off. And So one of the things I do after I have a study guide for the show, you know, who's doing what, that's the daddy. So
Mhm.
daddy and Goldberg become close because he didn't know what to do with that little girl, other people.
Mhm.
So after they do it, and remember this is the 50s, because we see her being rejected because she's a black woman writing. We see her doing other kinds of things. He takes her to dinner because he gets a great new job, etc. So I attached to that study guide a note that said, I want you to envision what would happen 10 years after this movie. In the movie, Molly, the little girl, is only 7 or 8. So 10 years later would make her 18. And because it's 2024 and they don't have any orientation to the 1950s, and the husband and the little girl are white,
Mhm.
every kid in the class marries them off
Oh.
because it's such a loving, they don't know that in the 50s
Right.
that wasn't going to happen.
Not
If
happening.
it did, their life was going to be
Very
really.
challenging.
And so I often think we don't make any progress, but that's a lot of great progress.
Yeah.
That the entire class every time thinks Manny and Karina are getting married. And yet, one of the things that happens when you're that sad and you don't have the words, sex seems like a great thing to do, to feel something. And the big problem is, this is a generalization, more often than not, women don't want to have sex because they don't think they should feel good. And men do want to have sex because it's the only way they can feel
You
good.
feel good.
And so we know about the high divorce rate among folks that lose children. They just
Yes.
can't talk to each other. And they can go to a group and someone says, you know, now someone says, now your child is with the angels. What are you talking about? He's God. Let him make another angel. Why did he need my kid? And then people in the church are very offended at this. So then that group might not take good care of them. Or they don't want to go to church anymore because it was always a family event. And they just can't bear it. Everything is a trap.
Right.
And trying to, all these folks need is validation and care. Don't say, call me anytime you want, and then let it go when it's 2 a.m. to the answering machine.
Yeah.
Because the nights are long and awful. Someone who's got a disease that they know is potentially catastrophic, and they realize they're not going to see their kids graduate from high school. That they know that how this is, and they just need someone to talk to. Don't let that go to the answering machine.
Yeah.
Right.
I have students, because I tell them, Tamika knows this too, but of course, that I don't want them driving home if they're drunk, or if they call, and they do call, which is funny. So then I get dressed and then I go get them and make sure that they're okay. And in class, for example, we talk a lot about things that are upsetting. And, you know, white people should just pick their own damn cotton. We wouldn't be in this mess. But now we have done, there aren't gonna be white people in heaven, I'm afraid. We got a lot to atone for. I mean, you name it, we were mean to them. Indigenous people, black people, brown people. And then we did on the guys of, yeah, but look at the progress. Yeah, for whom?
Yeah.
And so that whole concept of accepting that many aggressions are real, that's grief too.
Yeah.
You know what the trick is about being black? You can't hide it.
No,
I
you
could
can't.
hide that I'm a bigot, or I'm Jewish, or I'm Islamic, but you don't know that by looking at me. But every time you meet someone, you got to think, how are they going to be about this? Or am I going to have to manage all of these kinds of things? And you're doing so well for who you are. And then you've got to do something with each of those microaggressions. Not just go back to work. Each one of those builds up. All of that is great grief. You know, the everyday stuff about people beating you up or emotionally, psychologically abusing you, or mental ill people or drug addicts in the family. That's one thing, but this is kind of a daily thing.
Mhm.
You can't get enough degrees
Mhm.
to have a bigot think you're okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Then you're showing off.
Oh, you're preaching it.
Mm-hmm. Sally, you're bringing up all these different types of grief. I don't even think that people recognize that this is grief. Our culture does like a really bad job
Oh, they're terrible.
of holding grief and preparing people for grief and just making space for what it is supposed to be like. Is there a culture that has figured it out, to say that this is how, when something bad happens, this is how we collectively, this is the expectation of it. Like, this is how we're going to walk through it and give time.
Yeah, it's why I think racism and war is so crazy,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all almost exactly alike. We
Yeah.
do a whole piece in class about having kids come with a note card where
Mhm.
they research somebody's death practices versus their own.
Mm-hmm.
And they all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know if you guys remember who Myron Roll is. Do you remember who Myron
Yes.
was?
Yes.
Okay. I was his mentor for the Rhodes Scholarship.
Yeah.
Took 7 classes from me.
Mm-hmm.
We worked together on a project, lots of projects.
Mhm.
And he and I put together a piece when he was undergraduate to work with the Seminole tribe, because we noticed how high diabetes, obesity, heart disease, strokes, etc. And so
Mhm.
the Seminoles allowed us to come in and work with 5th and 6th graders. So he'd get out of football practice and we'd drive to Okeechobee to the Brighton Reservation.
Mhm.
And we get up the next morning and teach and work with these kids, etc. And one time we went, and a little 1st grader had died of meningitis.
Mm.
And we had 5th and 6th graders.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
many of them, one was a sister of that child, and the rest of them, it's a
Mhm.
small group.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I said, we should probably do something about kids in grief.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And we had our classes in the school.
Mhm.
And I just mentioned it to the principal, who came back immediately and said, no, the elders, we do not talk about grief and loss. It
Mm.
is not something that we do.
Mhm.
We don't say the name. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. And so I think we're all pretty awful
Mhm.
about managing something that everybody goes through.
Goes through.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And if there's a culture that works, I work with folks in Samoa,
Mhm.
which is just a little, it's just a little country that's a rock in the middle of the Pacific.
Mhm.
And they do like a 30-day grieving period, but see, 30 days isn't
Still not
enough.
enough.
More.
Um,
Oh, thank you for
Not
the
enough
30
time.
days. I really appreciate that. And I think that is a start of a beautiful conversation. If you need more, here you can have more.
well, and that's the deal. It's all I'm asking people to do is do what would help you.
Yeah.
And then to say, I know that helped me yesterday, but that's not helping me today.
Mhm.
Sometimes I can say things happen, and Amanda and I met
Mhm.
our child Amanda after Gerald died.
Mhm.
And we'll laugh, and
Mhm.
10 minutes later we'll say something and be in tears. That
Mhm.
tumultuous, mercurial
Mhm.
nature of this, it's hard to keep up.
Mhm.
And it's hard not to do negative value judgments. Well, you said yesterday it was okay. I know, but it's not okay today.
It's not good.
But
Mhm.
you've got to be introspective and self-aware enough
Mhm.
to not play it for the people that are standing outside.
Mhm.
I know you're sick of my grief, but I ain't done.
Mhm.
Sometimes you got to just say it.
Yeah.
Um, I know what you're thinking is you got to quit talking about him. No, I can't stop talking about him. I mean,
Mhm.
35 years was a long time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, my parents both died in their middle to late 90s without taking medicine, still bright as pennies, could beat me at the New York Times crossword puzzle. And both of them went to sleep one day and didn't wake up.
Yeah.
Absolutely the perfect death. And I
Mhm.
miss them every single day.
Mhm.
That's grief, folks.
Mhm.
And anyone that thinks you get over it, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting.
Yeah.
Yep. Because that doesn't help anyone. But you got this whole concept of what you two women are doing with self-care. It's the last thing we do. We
Right.
go back to work. If we cry, we go into the bathroom to do it.
Yep.
We apologize.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Just
Yes.
give me a minute. Just give me a
All the
minute. I'm just getting
time.
myself
I'm like,
together.
it's okay.
I know, but I should have this under. Why should you?
Yeah.
And so care of self, you guys wouldn't be doing this if you hadn't noticed that no one takes very good care of themselves. And if they do, they're usually branded as selfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so society won't buy it. Well, you've already had a week off. Do you need another week?
Yes.
Yeah, I probably need a lifetime, but I
forever
know I
off.
need this job.
Forever.
Yeah. And if you work for the state, the rules are very clear. I haven't read them recently, but I think it's you get 3 days with the child, 2 days with a parent, and then you got to come back to work.
Yeah.
And I hear
That's
people
just
say a lot.
after the death. Like, forget the fact that
It's been going on.
process, like just to get to the
Yeah,
funeral.
if you've been
That's
doing
a
anticipatory
process.
grieving while they've been sick, that's one whole thing.
Yeah.
But if they die suddenly, Dr. Ken Fowler is a perfect example.
I know.
Back while
Oh,
he was
gosh.
seeing a client. So my having to take over his practice was to try. I mean, there is another trauma.
Yeah.
And if people thought this is a person that helps me every day, it was gone. And in my life, if they say, no, he's the only one that got me. Finding a therapist is like finding a good hairdresser.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
You don't just go to the first guy you like. If they don't get you, see ya. You're paying them too much money to not get you.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to your support system. And certainly lots of people in this world were told to just suck it up. This is not the way we act in this family. And so, I mean, you two do work. You know how your clients respond.
Yep.
Do they not say these things?
Yes, I
We've been
definitely
talking about?
hear the crying, I'm sorry. People have it worse than me, downplaying what it is that they've been through, trying to put a time frame on how long they should be hurt or in pain.
Men and women, different.
Mm-hmm.
This is a sweeping generalization, but men are more likely to get angry and act out.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that women don't. But you can see if she's crying 24/7 and he's furious, they can't talk to each other, which is why there should be more data about sex and grief.
Exactly. And I think, being in a culture, and a lot of my clients identify as being Black.
That's the other thing. We don't have enough Black counselors.
We don't. And then for the
or
men,
judges.
Exactly. And for the men to be okay with crying, for the boys to be okay with crying, like this is a space, this is a place, let the tears flow. Let us normalize this is what sadness is, and you're not weak,
And sad isn't crazy. Let me
it's
just
not. It is
people
not.
come in and say, I'm so depressed. And I say, no, you're so sad.
Yes.
I mean, were you depressed before this happened? No.
No.
And well, that's another thing that, as you all know, your clients self-diagnose and they come in with their own diagnosis.
Yes.
And you say, where'd that come from? Well, I just know that's what it is. You've lost your mother. That's what it is. So self-diagnosing clients are a problem too. And because they're using other people's medications.
Yeah.
Certainly when I was coming up in this, I was one of the very first people. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was my mentor, and she wrote the very first book in '68 called Questions on Death and Dying. And in those days, she laid out a stage. Shock and disbelief, why me, anger, bartering, resolution. And now we know none of that works. That you can go through all those in one day. You can get to one and get stuck. You can do none of them. You can always stay in anger. And so people are still, I still hear Dr. Phil, who as a matter of fact, I know, Shamika, you know this. That was the day I was supposed to be on Oprah.
Mhm.
and I couldn't go, so they put Phil McGraw on, and then look what happened to him. He got
Oh God.
yeah. Makes me laugh every time. I can't think of anything worse than doing that. He's still, I mean, he's off the air now, but I've heard him 100 times. I yell at the set and say,
Yeah.
"No, Phil, that's not what we do when someone says that."
Yes. Mhm.
But that whole idea about his letting him talk about stages rather than saying, let me just say to all of you, none of that is valid. I mean, people do go through stages and then they go
Yeah.
backwards and then they go
Mhm.
forwards again.
Forwards,
And they
yes.
might do. So if we look at grief as a like
Mhm.
that, here's what grief really looks like.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but we've sold to people that they're supposed to move
Through
cleanly
these little
through
these
stages.
little steps, and then once you get to the top,
Yeah,
everything
then
will
you're done.
be okay. Mhm.
Show me that. I have yet to experience that.
Mhm.
I mean, and the biggie, of course, is when people talk about grief, they think it's only about death.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's a
And if you're
loss.
carrying a day, you know, what makes me laugh when there's new research now that says, being Black can just
Mhm.
be like a daily grief. Really?
Mhm.
Just now you're writing about that in John. I was just in a medical magazine that we've
Mhm.
now added
Mhm.
racial disparities as a chronic grief. Really?
Mhm. Mhm.
I used to wonder why. In the old days, when guys did surgery, they did it with their bare hands and then they wiped it on their
Mhm.
apron, then they hung up the apron, then they did the next surgery again.
Mhm.
Wouldn't you want to wash your hands?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then some guy said, maybe we should wash our hands. And then recently we think, so if a kid grew up in a really awful environment, you think it might affect him as adults? You think it might?
Right.
But that's no research too. You would
Mhm.
just think common sense would make you know that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That is that it's difficult and that we have to give such a long and wide berth.
Mhm.
Certainly after Gerald, my husband, died,
Mhm.
what many, many people said is, we don't know what to say to you because you're the expert in this.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I said, well, I'm living what I taught. I'll tell
Yeah.
you that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
that's the other thing. We think we don't have the right thing to say. All you're saying is you're going to the house, you're knocking on the door where someone has had the great loss, and you're not taking a Publix platter. Let me remind you of that.
Okay. I got an extra public
No
splatter.
public
No
splatter.
more Publix platter. You're taking paper products and ice
Yeah.
and an extra ice chest.
Uh-huh.
Now, symbolically, as you step into the house, nail your shoes to the floor and then go sit by the person that's the saddest. And since you don't have shoes on, you might as well slip theirs on in your mind and say to them, tell me all about it.
Mhm.
And let
Mm.
them tell their story without you interrupting with narcissistic communication and saying, oh, yeah, that happened to me too.
Me
Oh, no,
too.
no,
Yeah.
it's like really my neighbor. Or was it my neighbor or was it? And then the story's about you.
Mhm.
So just letting people tell their story, it's one of the best ways that we handle folks that are sad.
Yeah. Shamika, I think this is the foretelling of another show that we need to do. It's like, if you don't have good friends,
Yep.
you're
Yes.
not engaging in
That's such a
self-care.
big, big
Yeah.
issue in
Mhm.
self-care.
Yeah.
Now, let me put a codicil on that.
Mhm.
You're with a guy that's a jerk and he treats you badly, and you go to your friend and you tell them, and she already knows what a jerk he is.
Mhm.
And then within 24 hours, she has makeup sex
Mhm.
and they're back together. And then, of course, within the week, he'll do all this stuff again. And then
Mhm.
she'll come back to you and tell the story again.
Mhm.
There's got to be a point where you say,
Mhm.
I can't talk to you about this anymore
Yeah. Mhm.
because obviously I'm not helping.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know how I feel about it.
Mhm.
And I am more interested in keeping you as a friend
Mhm.
than I am in losing you because I'm so upset with this guy.
Yeah.
So here's our boundaries.
Yeah.
I will love you forever
Yes.
as my friend, but we're not going to talk about this anymore.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And because you know what he's like.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
here's why she keeps coming to you.
Yeah.
Her issue with him, and she knows perfectly well, there's nothing you can't tell her she doesn't already know, is a pot of boiling water on the stove with a lid on it.
Mhm.
She comes and debriefs with you,
Mhm.
Mhm.
which is the equivalent of taking the lid off the pot,
Mhm. Mhm.
not taking the pot off the heat.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
And then she feels better for a while.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then the lid is back on and she debriefs, but goes and repeats behavior.
Yeah.
If you want to keep the friendship, you can't talk to her about him ever again.
Yeah.
And that's self-care.
That is definitely
That is self-care.
And what I've told folks, I was like, kindly, please, this is definitely something you should bring up in therapy, though. Definitely something, because maybe they're better than me in helping you.
No, that's
figure
exactly
this
right.
out.
Therapists are not your roommate. Therapists are people who went to school to figure out how to put a
Yeah.
plan together to make it better.
Yes.
It's not your mother. It's not someone at a bar.
Mhm.
Those aren't therapists.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's another issue. But
Mhm.
we have many issues, my darling women who I love.
Yeah. You know,
So are we good? Did we do good?
yeah, I think we did good. I just want to bring up ask one more question though.
Yes.
You brought up a couple of things that people sometimes do when they're grieving, but I would say some things just straight up, please just avoid doing that. We know the sex can be one of them, like grieving
Oh,
and
yeah.
having tons of sex. But what would be something just to say, oh my gosh, just at all costs, just please just avoid this, when you're grieving.
Oh, well, okay.
Mhm.
You're the therapist.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah,
going
okay.
to say to me, how do you feel today?
Yeah.
Okay,
How do
ask
you
me.
how do you feel today?
Well, not great, but I did try something.
Oh, really? What
Makes
did
me a
you
little better.
try?
And you say
And really, what did you try?
retail therapy.
Huh?
I bought stuff and now I feel better. Therapists have got to stop that
Yeah.
because all of a sudden there are 42 QVC boxes outside.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be buyer's remorse, but buying stuff, the acquisition of goods.
Mm-hmm.
My psychology background is kind of Freudian, and the negative part of having bad toilet training really is I am what I own, possess, and barter for. So the acquisition of goods
Yeah.
determines my worth.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when I am exquisitely sad, I like every night buying things on QVC for that moment. And now I'm also in debt.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's part of it. If somebody dies, don't get married in the next 20 minutes
That.
to someone because men are more likely to women do it too, but men don't know there's a kitchen in their house. And so they need someone to go in that room and cook. So, so I mean, especially if you have children, they're trying to grieve their daddy and now a man is there I just had a kid that the schools had me talk to. She marries within 6 months. He sweeps in, he's a military guy. He makes the kid give his dog away. He's lost his dad. He puts all these new rules into place and the kid lights the garage on fire. I get that completely.
I can see.
I get it completely.
Yeah.
Yep, but they didn't get it. So I make people promise me no major decisions for a year. Don't sell the house. Don't get married. Don't decide you've always wanted to be a drag queen. Don't decide that I'm going to be a pole dancer. This is just don't alcohol and drugs to self-medicate. And now you're in it. And what do we know? We know that kids especially, if you live in a neighborhood where everybody does drugs, that kid's going to be involved with drugs somehow. He's going to take drugs. He's going to sell drugs. He's going to be with people who do drugs. If he goes, that kids want to go to the dance. They know there's going to be a shooting, but they're still going to the dance. And you can't talk them out of that. You can't never use rational, logical talking to irrational, illogical people. You might as well be saying blah, 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 blah. The kid's going to the dance. I know there's going to be someone's going to get shot, but he's going to the dance. And for people that live without realizing the reality of situations, they're horrified. And then they make big value judgments and they talk to other people about how awful those people are. Yeah, okay, great. So I work with one of the schools in town, one of an F school. Okay. And I work with the teachers. But I buy, 700 boxes of crayons because they're underfunded, of course. And I was there not too long ago, and as I pull up to do what I'm going to do that day, all the police are around. It's in the neighborhood behind the new Chick-fil-A in town. So if I'm going down Tennessee Street and I was to turn into the neighborhoods behind, like where Marathon used to be and Domino's, that neighborhood there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a food desert, number one. There are no, if you don't have a car, the only place is a little 7-Eleven. Okay, that's it for the whole neighborhood. That's where their food's coming from. And I recently was part of a health fair in which there should have been 1,000 people there, and there were just a couple hundred. So we know that things are going on there. And so I come in and a guy's been shot and he's dead in the 7-Eleven as I arrive. When I leave an hour later, 7-Eleven's open and people are buying groceries, they're buying food.
Okay.
Don't miss a beat.
Right? Hold
Don't miss a
the
beat.
Cueto dead guy, and then okay. So we don't use middle class valuing. You gotta be where the people are. You gotta put their shoes on, like we did when we knocked on that door. And you don't do platitudes. I'm so sick of grant projects that all they do is redefine the problem. Where's the intervention, folks? Yeah, we know that a lot of these folks are hypertensive, but make the drugs affordable. So, this kind of upsets me, but generally speaking, grief is a constant coming from many different ways. That answer your question, my darling Val?
It does. It does.
I think you both are wonderful.
Oh,
Thank you,
absolutely.
Sally.
Thank you for asking me.
This was needed. This was I hope this has been helpful in terms of people wrap their minds around grief. That is a journey. It's just not, a paragraph or it's a chapter where you just, turn the page. It's a journey that you'll continue to walk through, something that will always be with you. And I think my number one takeaway is just make sure your village is strong. Make sure if it's not the whole village, just at least just that one person in the village or a few people in the village.
Right. And don't mix up the words normal and healthy.
Yes.
What may seem normal to you may be wildly toxic and chaotic. So find the people in the village that are healthy folks that will tell you the truth.
Yes.
This was a time of reflecting on our own grief that we've gone through and more than likely are still dealing with in different ways, but also how are we, or just even myself individually, being a friend and being there for those that I do know are dealing with grief.
Write it on your calendar, folks. And when the year is up, you're gonna find that person that day, and you're gonna say, "I know this is a tough day." Don't say to yourself, "Well, I won't bring it up." She knows it's the day.
Yeah, they know.
Right.
And so send a card, leave a flower under her windshield. Offer to take the kid. You do not need a PhD. This is not rocket science. We just have to take care of each other. It's so easy.
Yeah.
It's so exquisitely easy. I don't know how to tell people that's all there is to it. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you so
Well,
much,
thank
Dr.
you,
Carey. We
Sally.
appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.
For your words of wisdom.
Bye, darlings.
Bye.